Hi everyone, before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. San Juan, Puerto Rico, August 14th, 2021. The sun had been brutal that afternoon, pressing down on the pier until the steel railings were too hot to touch. The humidity clung to every breath, the kind of thick air that made your shirt stick to your back the moment you stepped outside. By the time my wife and I wheeled our luggage across the gangway and onto the cruise ship, we were already damp with sweat and exhausted. Boarding was chaotic. Lines of families, retirees in polo shirts, newlyweds snapping selfies. The whole thing felt like controlled cattle herding. Still, there was a nervous excitement in me. This was our first trip after the long pandemic shutdown, and we were determined to enjoy it. By 4 o'clock, we were in our cabin, a midship, balcony on deck 8. The hallway carpet had that dizzy swirling pattern cruise lines always use to distract from stains, and the air smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and something floral trying to mask it. Our steward had left towel swans on the bed. At 5, the alarm horn sounded. 6 long blasts and 1 short, the muster drill. Every cruise starts with it. You gather under your assigned letter, put on your life jacket, and listen to the safety spiel, a formality. Our station was E. It was printed on our key cards. Easy enough. We strapped the stiff orange jackets over our shoulders and followed the stream of people down the corridor toward the open deck. The sun was lower now, golden light catching on the windows. We found the bulkhead marked with a large E stenciled in blue paint. That's when it happened. A young crew member with a clipboard looked at us, frowned, and shook her head. No, this isn't E, this is F Station F. I blinked at the wall. The letter really did look wrong now, like a capital E someone had hastily drawn an extra line through. The people around us muttered, shifting nervously, shuffling further. Down the corridor toward the next sign. Come on, my wife said. Maybe we misread it. The crowd felt too tight, the air heavy with heat and perfume and sweat. Someone joked loudly that the designers wanted us to practice panicking for real. A few laughed, but no one sounded relaxed. When we reached the next station, a different woman stamped our cards. She gave me the kind of smile you give a nervous dog and said softly, "You were already counted." "What?" I asked. But she just moved to the next passenger. When the drill ended, the crowd dispersed. We tried to return to our cabin the way we came, but the letters on the bulkhead seemed to change as we approached them. B became D, D became E, E became F. It was like the signs were shifting just ahead of us, nudging us along. My wife laughed, uneasily. "I think we're just turned around, these corridors all look the same." We eventually reached our deck, but it felt wrong, like we had looped in a circle we couldn't see. That night after dinner, we returned to the cabin to find a note slid under the door. White paper, damp to the touch as though it had been licked. In bold letters it read, "In an actual emergency, follow crew directions." I asked my wife if she had seen anyone drop it off. She shook her head. We set the life jackets on the sofa. Before bed, I checked our key cards again. Her card clearly read Muster Station E. Mine said Muster Station FI didn't sleep well. 2 nights later, at exactly 2:11 a.m., the horn sounded again. The PA crackled. Crew drill, crew drill. But the voice was wrong. Too thin, too far, away. The kind of sound you hear when a radio is picking up a signal it shouldn't. We opened our door to find the hallway already full of people in pajamas and robes. Everyone shuffled in the same direction, as if the ship itself was funneling us. The air was hotter than it should have been, a sticky warmth that smelled of canvas and salt. We passed the bulkheads again. The letters shifted as we walked, changing, under the fluorescent lights always leading us further. B to D, D to E, E to F. Stay together, I whispered to my wife. But my voice felt swallowed by the walls. Eventually, we reached a locked steel door at the end of a corridor we didn't remember existing. The hinges were scabbed with salt, From the other side came a dry, papery rustling, like life jackets being handled by hands we couldn't see. The smell of mildew and wet canvas seeped under the frame. Then a voice spoke. Not from a PA, not from a person. Right at my ear, as close as breath. You're already counted. You were always already counted. My wife's hand clamped down, on mine. Nobody else in the corridor spoke. Nobody knocked on the door. We all just stood there, waiting for something to happen. Finally, without a word, people began turning back. One by one, silently, as if they were afraid to break some unspoken. For we did the same. We didn't run, we didn't look behind us. We just walked back to our cabin. When we opened the door, both of our life jackets were lying on the floor, buckled tight, straps wet as though they'd just been pulled from the sea. The next morning, the jackets were dry. No note, no announcement, in the daily schedule. At breakfast, the other passengers smiled and chatted about excursions like nothing had happened. When I tried to bring it up to the man at the next table, he gave me a polite laugh, the kind you give a drunk uncle, and turned away. That night, when I checked our keycards again, the station codes were gone. Just blank white plastic. We disembarked at the end of the week without further incident, but I can't stop thinking about it. I've been on ships before. I know how muster drills are supposed to work. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up, certain that I can hear the moan of that horn again, muffled through the walls of my house and the shuffle of people moving in the dark. I checked the news recently. That ship, the one we sailed, was taken out of service last year. Mechanical issues, the article said. But the photo showed something I didn't expect. A shot of the port side, zoomed in on the faded paint of the muster station markings. The letters were blurred, streaked, as though they had been painted over too many times. You couldn't quite tell if it said E or F. And I swear just for a second, I thought I saw a pale orange strap hanging from the railing, dripping seawater into nothing. Eastern Caribbean, March. The weather had been calm all week, the kind of perfect spring cruise where the ocean seemed painted flat, blue upon blue, interrupted only by a ripple or the shadow of a seabird. My wife and I were on the 11th day of a 2-week trip, a vacation we had promised ourselves after a hard year of family illness and late nights at work. We had booked an inside stateroom on Deck 8, cabin 8239, nothing fancy but quiet and tucked away from the chaos of the pool deck. I thought it would be a relief to sleep without windows, free from sunrise and traffic, a cave at sea. I've always been a light sleeper, though. Even here, in a room buried in steel and carpet, I could hear the deep creaks of the ship's frame, the hiss of water rushing against the hull, and stranger still, the way voices seemed to slip through the pipes. Late at night, lying awake, I would catch laughter, coughing, even a sudden muttered word that carried no source. I told myself it was the plumbing carrying sound from other cabins. The thought made sense, but it didn't help me rest easier. It was our 4th night when I woke to the sound of the phone ringing. It wasn't loud, more of a mechanical burr, and for a moment I didn't recognize it. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red, 3:03 a.m. I let it ring once, twice, then rolled over and picked up. Hello? Silence. Not dead air, though. I could hear something. Breathing. Not heavy or panicked, but slow, patient, steady, like someone sitting close. Enough to the line to wait me out. Wrong number? I joked weakly, glancing at my wife. She stirred, confused, then turned away. The call ended with a click. In the morning, over breakfast, I told her. She brushed it off, but I went down to guest services anyway. The young man behind the desk gave me a polished smile and tapped at his monitor. No calls to your stateroom after 11 p.m. last night, sir. He even spun the screen to show me a neat grid of data. Nothing at all. That night, I unplugged the phone. We pushed the cord into the drawer beneath the desk, certain that would be the end of it. Sleep came easily after 2 glasses of wine. At 3:03 a.m., the ringing started again. The sound wasn't as loud as it had been, but unmistakable. My wife sat up wide-eyed as the faint burr echoed from inside the desk drawer. I pulled it open. The phone was dead, the cord loose. Still, the receiver vibrated as though it was connected. Against every sensible thought, I lifted it to my ear. The breathing again, and this time, layered under it, the wet, sticky whisper of pages turning. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice low. The breathing stopped. A pause. Then the unmistakable sound of plastic against plastic, as if a receiver had been set gently into its cradle. The line went dead. I set the phone on the nightstand and left it there. We barely slept. In the morning, the red voicemail light was blinking. My wife pressed play. The message was only 3 seconds long. The sound of waves slapping steel, recorded too close, too distorted, as though the microphone was pressed beneath the waterline. We asked to change cabins. To their credit, they didn't argue. A woman at the desk nodded, typed quickly, and handed us a new key card. Same deck, just farther down the hall. The new room was nearly identical to the old. Same dizzy carpet pattern, same print of some vague watercolor seascape, same faint chemical smell in the air. For a while, we convinced ourselves it had been some glitch. Maybe another guest with a hacked phone, maybe a prank, maybe something rational. That night, at exactly 3:03, the phone rang. This time, when I picked it up, I realized something was different. The sound wasn't coming from the line. The breathing wasn't part of the call. It was inside the room. It lagged by a fraction of a second, as if the noise of the waves and the crackling line arrived first, and then the breath followed. An echo just behind it. My wife whispered, "Hang up. Just hang up." I did, but the sound didn't stop. It seemed to move, faint and steady, shifting from the desk to the far wall, then closer, until I could swear it hovered at the edge of the bed. We didn't sleep until dawn. We disembarked a few days later and swore to laugh about it someday. A silly story to tell, nothing more. Yet the unease followed me home. I began waking at 3:03 a.m. in our house, staring at the dark, listening for a phone that wasn't there. Weeks passed before I received the survey email from the cruise line. It was the usual form, check boxes for food, entertainment, stateroom, cleanliness. Then I saw one odd question tucked in with the others. "Did you enjoy the nightly 3:03 wake-up call?" My chest tightened. I screenshotted it and sent it to my wife. When I went back to the email later, the question was gone. No evidence it had ever been there. I checked my phone, ready to show her the screenshot. The file was corrupted, the image, black except for a red blinking light in the corner that I didn't remember being there when I saved it. That night, my cell phone rang. 3:03 a.m. This story ends here, but its silence lingers, like a breath waiting patiently for someone else to answer. Everyone jokes that there's no Deck 13. The ship's elevator panel certainly thought it was clever. 12-14 casino, but no 13. Maritime tradition, they say. Sailors are superstitious. Passengers laugh it off. I laughed too until the night. I stopped laughing. It was August 17th, 2022. The ship was somewhere between Miami and Cozumel, cutting through warm water under a sky so clear it felt fake. I'd left the midnight buffet in that post-dessert fog of regret, my stomach heavy with pie I didn't need. It was 1:17 a.m. I remember because I'd checked my phone before stepping into the empty elevator. I pressed 9. My cabin was there. The hum of the machinery was soothing, the faint smell of fried food still clinging to me. The panel lit up, 10, 11, 12, and then without a pause, the light ticked one more, past where there was supposed to be nothing. The screen blinked. 13. The elevator shuddered slightly, then stopped. The doors slid open with a soft sigh. I expected another hallway like all the others, patterned carpet, beige walls, maybe some tipsy passengers staggering back from the bar. Instead, what I saw didn't fit with the rest of the ship at all. The carpet was different, darker, worn down so badly the anchor pattern was only a faint ghost of thread. The lighting was dim and warm, the kind of bulbs you'd see in old photographs, yellowed, buzzing faintly, and there was music, a tinny old recording, the kind my mother used to hum when she ironed. Blue Moon, or something like it. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and starch like pressed laundry. I should have stayed inside, pressed close doors, and gone back to my room. But curiosity wins against common sense when nothing feels truly dangerous yet. I stepped out. The carpet felt softer than it looked, but squishy, as if it had been damp once and never fully dried. Black and white photos lined the walls in tarnished brass frames. Some showed the ship, but under a different name I couldn't quite read, the letters blurred as if the photo itself resisted clarity. Others showed passengers, women in long coats, men in suits and hats, children clutching stuffed animals. All of them posed stiffly, their eyes too sharp for old photography, as though they weren't looking at the photographer but at me. The nearest photo had a brass plaque beneath it. "Survivors assemble here." I leaned closer. The photo showed a crowd standing in this very hallway, shoulder to shoulder, their faces pale, clothes damp. And in the front row was a man who looked almost exactly like me. The hair was shorter. The suit was wrong for any decade I knew, but the face, the angle of the jaw, the way the eyebrows tilted was mine. The elevator doors began to close. I stuck my hand out instinctively and the metal resisted like it didn't want me back inside. "Just a second," I muttered, though to who I couldn't say. The doors stayed open. I turned back to the photo. The man who looked like me wasn't staring at the camera like the others. He was staring slightly off, as if his eyes were locked on something out of frame. His mouth was caught halfway between open and closed, like he was about to say something, or had just seen something he couldn't. A cold draft swept through the hallway, carrying the smell of salt water, sharp and raw. I looked down. The carpet had darkened, spreading slowly from under the elevator toward where I stood as if soaked. I backed up. My shoes squelched faintly against the floor. "Hello?" I said, my voice unsteady. No answer, just the old music, tinny and faint, warbling from nowhere. From down the hall past the photos I thought I saw movement. A shape, barely visible in the yellow light, slipping from one side of the hallway to the other. My pulse quickened. The plaque under another photo caught my eye as I retreated. "Final roll call, 1936. The image showed rows of bodies lined on this carpet, their faces blurred as if underwater. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. The doors tried to close again, slower this time as though weighed down. Inside, the mirrored wall reflected me, but not quite in sync. My reflection lagged, its mouth still open, eyes still fixed on the hallway even after I turned. The doors closed with a soft groan, like the ship itself was reluctant to let me leave. The panel lit up again. 14. When the doors opened, I stumbled into the familiar hallway of Deck 14. Bright lights, patterned carpet, the faint smell of disinfectant. Normal. Too normal. But the mirrored reflection still stuck in my mind. The way it lingered. I made it back to my cabin, locked the door, and sat on the bed with my heart hammering. I tried to convince myself I'd been tired, half dreaming, maybe a little drunk from the punch. The next morning, I asked one of the stewards if there was ever a Deck 13. He gave me a look that seemed rehearsed, the kind used for annoying questions. "No, sir. Maritime superstition, there is no Deck 13. But as he turned away, I caught something in his face, the smallest flicker of recognition, like he'd heard the question before and didn't want to answer honestly. That night, I avoided the elevators, took the stairs instead, and tried not to think about it. But the memory won't leave me. The man in the photo, the face so close to mine, the eyes locked on something just beyond the frame, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever he was staring at, I'll see it too. Maybe the next time the elevator decides to stop on a deck that isn't supposed to exist. Grand Cayman had been canceled for weather, but the cruise line didn't want us trapped on the ship all day. They announced alternate experiences over the PA, upbeat voices trying to make disappointment sound like opportunity. We were told tenders would run to a nearby pier where local vendors had set up temporary stalls. It wasn't much of a choice, but after 2 days at sea, people were restless. I joined the line in the atrium and was herded toward the bobbing white lifeboats strapped along the ship's sides, the ones they call tenders when they use them for ferry service. It was around noon, gray and wet. The sky sagged low, bruised, purple at the edges, rain slicing sideways across the horizon. When I stepped into Tender Boat 7, I noticed how small it felt compared to the ship. Just a narrow tub with a canvas roof stretched tight overhead, low enough that taller men had to hunch. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Spray slapped my face as soon as we pushed off. The engine was loud, a steady growl vibrating through the benches, but the pilot kept glancing back at the ship like he didn't trust it to stay where it was. The ride was quick. In 10 minutes, we docked against a slab of concrete where vendors sat beneath plastic sheets that ballooned and snapped in the wind. Their tables sagged under jewelry, t-shirts, and wooden turtles, all covered by cloudy tarps. Everyone laughed, too loud. The kind of laughter that comes when strangers are trying to keep their spirits up, the pilot said, back in 15, then lit a cigarette under the awning of a closed customs shed. I wandered the little strip of stalls but didn't buy anything. The rain came in bursts, hard enough to drive us under cover, then easing to a mist. The air was damp and metallic, heavy enough that my shirt clung to my skin. When it was time to return, we climbed back aboard. That's when I noticed it. The number painted on the bow wasn't 7 anymore. It was 6. At first I thought maybe I had misremembered, but I'm the kind of person who notices details. I'd looked straight at the number when we first boarded, because I'd wondered if 7 was unlucky at sea. I mentioned it to the pilot as we settled in. He shrugged without meeting my eye. Numbers are for inventory, he said. Boat is boat. We set off, and halfway back the engine gave a choking cough, then cut out completely. The boat slowed, tilting into silence. The only sound was canvas popping overhead with each gust of wind. Spray pattered against the plastic windows, but otherwise, it was still. Too still. The pilot scrubbed his face with both hands and lifted the radio. He spoke in short, clipped words I didn't understand. Jargon, maybe, or another language. The static made it worse. While he spoke, I found myself staring at the wake. Only there wasn't one. The ocean behind us was smooth, glassy, undisturbed. We were suspended in a bowl of water that looked polished, reflecting the sky like a mirror. The silence was thick, almost muffled, as if the sea had swallowed all sound. If you've never heard silence on the ocean, then you haven't been properly alone. Ahead, the ship waited, but it wasn't moving, not even rocking on the swells. It looked like a toy glued to glass. The pilot shut off the radio and stood. His voice cracked when he said, "Everyone keep still for me." We froze. He leaned over the side, looking down, like he was checking his own reflection. His face changed, eyes wide, jaw slack. I followed his gaze. At first I thought it was bioluminescence, some trick of the storm. But no. Lights glowed beneath the surface, faint and greenish, evenly spaced, stretching away like a street lined with lamps. They were too regular, too fixed. It was like a second port city had been built down there, perfectly preserved and faithfully burning. Nobody else saw. Or if they did, they didn't say. One woman was whispering to herself, clutching her husband's sleeve. A child whimpered. The pilot's hands trembled on the wheel. Then the engine coughed back to life, startling us all. He jammed it into gear, and the boat surged forward like it had never failed. When we reached the ship, the rope ladder swung in the rain. People scrambled up, eager to be back aboard. I was the last to climb. As I set my foot on the first rung, I glanced at the bow again. The number was 7. Scuffed, but clear. I climbed quickly, pulling myself onto the platform where crew waited with umbrellas. I turned to wave thanks to the pilot, but he wasn't watching me. His face was pale, drawn tight with something I didn't want to name. He was staring at the ship's hull instead, eyes fixed on the steel like it had spoken to him. I followed, his gaze, and froze. I didn't see anything at first, just rain streaking down black paint. Then I noticed faint scratches, shallow marks gouged into the hull, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. They weren't random. They curved and slashed in a pattern, like someone had dragged a blade deliberately. I leaned closer, squinting. That's when I realized they weren't scratches at all. They were letters, words jagged and uneven as if carved from inside the steel. The pilot's lips moved, shaping something silent. I read the words, though I wish I hadn't. It was his name, his full name, and a date. Next week. I blinked, rain stinging my eyes. When I looked again, the steel was smooth. No marks, just dark hull gleaming wet. I turned back to wave at the pilot, but he wasn't in the boat anymore, and tender boat 7 bobbed below, empty, waiting. It was the second night of our cruise, a Monday just after sunset. The air was warm but carried a strange coolness off the Atlantic that clung to your clothes and made the metal railings slick. The water was unnervingly calm, like flat slate stretching out in every direction. I remember thinking it was too still, too quiet for the middle of the ocean, almost as if the ship were sitting in a lake rather than moving through endless miles of open sea. We had signed our daughter up for the kids' club that morning. She was 7, shy but curious, and had lit up when she saw the bright playrooms filled with beanbags, art supplies, and screens flashing cartoons. The staff gave each child a wristband with a built-in RFID chip so parents could track them. Near the elevators on every deck, you could scan your room card and a display would show a ship diagram with a glowing dot marking your child's location. Clever, expensive, and comforting. My daughter immediately made the band her own by attaching it to a cheap plastic lanyard she'd brought from home, one with a little turquoise seahorse keychain dangling from it. She was proud of it in the way only kids are, showing strangers in the buffet line how it beeps if you scan it. That night, after dinner, she sat next to us in the lounge with a cone of strawberry ice cream. I wiped melted streaks off her chin with a napkin while my wife got up to refill our coffees. Out of idle curiosity, I walked over to the elevator screen and scanned our card. Her dot blinked bright and clear, not in the lounge but in the splash zone, a kiddie pool area on deck 12. I looked back over my shoulder and there she was, swinging her legs against the chair, pink ice cream dripping onto the floor. I flagged down a crew member in a crisp white shirt. "This says my daughter's in the pool. She's right here." The young man leaned in, frowning. "Glitch," he said after a moment. "Happens sometimes in storms." "There's no storm," I said. He glanced toward the panoramic windows, where the sea spread gray and motionless, then gave me a smile that was too quick, too rehearsed. "Electronics. Nothing to worry about." I wanted to believe him. Later that night, around 10, we checked again before walking her to the kids' club movie night. The screen showed her dot, not in the theater, not in the lounge, but on deck. I didn't even know passengers could access Deck 0. The map was different down there, blocky and utilitarian. No restaurants or cabins marked, just storage compartments and crew areas. Her dot pulsed near something labeled Service Corridor. "That can't be right," I muttered. My wife pressed the card again. The dot stayed. We went to guest services. They paged the club. Staff gave us warm smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "It's a systems error," the manager said, smoothing the lapel of his navy blazer. "These things happen. Children sometimes pass near areas where the signal bounces." "Bounces onto a floor we can't access?" I asked. He held his smile. "Exactly." But when he typed something into his terminal, I saw the reflection in the glass behind him, our daughter's dot moving, slowly, like a drifting balloon, from the service corridor toward the edge of the deck diagram. Then it blinked off into nothing, replaced by a word I hadn't seen before. "Offship." The manager turned the monitor away, flustered. "It's just terminology. The system occasionally loses track. Your daughter is safe." She was in the theater by then, sitting cross-legged with popcorn in her lap, laughing at a cartoon. I tried to make a joke of it later, telling my wife about GPS signals bouncing off steel walls, about cruise lines using discount electronics. She didn't laugh. She told me to drop it. That night at 3:40 a.m., I woke with my mouth dry and the faint smell of wet chlorine in the air, sharp and chemical. I thought maybe the air conditioning was pulling in cleaning fumes from the pool deck. I rolled out, of bed and padded barefoot to the door. My hand froze halfway to the handle. Hanging from the outside knob was my daughter's lanyard. The seahorse was bleached white as though the cheap dye had been soaked away in water. Her wristband's little LED pulsed faintly, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. I pushed the door open in a panic. My daughter was asleep in the top bunk, hair fanned on the pillow, breathing soft. Her small hands curled like folded birds against her chest. She didn't stir. I picked up the lanyard, and without waking my wife, walked it down the hall to the elevator lobby. My stomach churned with a cold, heavy dread. I pressed the band to the screen. Her dot bloomed instantly on the ship diagram. Then, as I stared, it drifted. Not along corridors this time, not even on Deck 0. The dot slid past the hull's cartoon outline, into the gray emptiness beyond. It floated outward, slow and languid, like someone lying on their back in water. The LED on the band blinked faster, as though in distress, before fading and dying. I didn't tell my wife. The next morning, I cut the wristband off and threw it in a trash bin at port. My daughter cried, insisting she wanted her seahorse lanyard back, but I promised her we'd buy a better one at home. 2 weeks after we returned, a package arrived. No return address, only guest services printed neatly on the label. Inside was a new lanyard, turquoise with the same plastic seahorse. A note on cruise line stationery read, "We believe you left this behind." The seahorse smelled faintly of bleach. And sometimes when I check on my daughter at night, I swear I catch the same chlorine sting in the air, as though the ocean has found a way to follow us home. It was the second night of our trip, somewhere between Nassau and Miami, August 12, 2022. The weather outside was calm for once, warm air and low waves tapping the hull like an absent-minded hand drumming a desk. I couldn't sleep. The cabin, air was thick with detergent from the towels my wife had hung to dry, and her breathing had already settled into that steady rhythm of someone far away in dreams. My shirt was damp at the collar from sweat, and I figured I might as well drag myself to the laundry room before morning. On cruise ships, the laundry always feels like some forgotten pocket of the vessel, wedged deep below decks, where the hum of the engines replaces the silence people usually expect at night. It was close to 2 in the morning when I stepped into the narrow hallway that led to the self-service laundromat. The carpet was soft but worn at the edges, patterned with swirls that always reminded me of cigarette smoke. The fluorescent bulbs overhead hummed like mosquitoes, and every few steps a metal panel in the wall clicked as though the ship was adjusting itself mid-breath. The laundry room door didn't latch properly. It had a faded blue sticker on it, peeling at the edges, reminding passengers to be courteous, don't leave clothes unattended. When I pushed the door open, it swung a little too far, groaning as if it hadn't been oiled in years. Inside, the place was empty, and that emptiness had its own kind of sound. The low roll of drums from the machinery underfoot, the steady breathing of dryers that hadn't been fed coins in hours. There was a pair of khaki shorts abandoned in one of the dryers, tumbling endlessly, forgotten by someone who had probably gone back to their cabin drunk or tired. On the tiled floor, just inside the door, I noticed a single damp footprint, darker than the rest of the floor. I compared it against my sneakers, and it wasn't mine. Too wide, too long, the heel sharper than any shoe I'd seen on board. I shook it off, fed quarters into 2 machines, and loaded our clothes in. The metal bench against the wall was cold when I sat down, and the whole ship seemed to breathe through the floorboards. The tumblers caught the overhead light and spun it like water, and I found myself drifting. That was when I saw it. A white undershirt, thin as paper, pinned itself against the glass of my washer. It wasn't ours. I leaned closer, frowning at the way the fabric seemed to stretch, cling, almost bulge forward. In the swirl of the cycle, the cloth pressed outward, and for a second I swore I saw the suggestion of a nose, the hollow of an eye, the curve of a mouth behind it. It was the kind of face a child might claim to see in the clouds. Nothing definite. Nothing you could prove. But I knew the washer had been empty when I started. The bench squealed against the floor as I got up. My heart was already pounding, and when I looked back at the wet footprint by the door, it was gone. Or maybe not gone. Changed. It was larger, now not wet but crusted over as though salt water had dried into it. The edges flaked like old paint. That was when I noticed the cart. It hadn't been there before. A crew member's rolling cart stacked with neatly folded towels blocking part of the doorway. Leaning on it was a woman I didn't recognize. She wore a white uniform, though it was yellowed at the seams, and her cap hung loosely to one side. Her elbow rested on the cart as if she'd been standing there a long time. "Heat's good tonight," she said. Her voice was calm, almost kind, but low, like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "Yeah," I muttered, fumbling for words. "I guess it is." I started toward the door, intent on brushing past her, but she tilted her head slightly and said, "Leave them." The way she said it made me stop. It wasn't a demand. It was something softer, coaxing, like advice from a stranger who somehow knew me. "They'll be folded," she added. I didn't answer. I slipped out through the gap between the cart and the doorframe, my shoulder brushing the rough fabric of one of the stacked towels. I didn't look back. When I returned in the morning, the laundry room was empty again. The cart was gone. The footprint was gone. Our clothes were stacked neatly on the bench, folded in a way that was too careful, too perfect for some other passenger to have done it out of courtesy. I picked up one of my t-shirts. The cotton was crisp, almost stiff, as if it had dried in sunlight instead of a machine. When I pulled it over my head later, I caught the faintest smell clinging to it. Not detergent, not fabric softener. Salt. Under that, something faintly fishy, and under that, something sweet and rotten like flowers left too long in stagnant water. I didn't tell my wife. What was I supposed to say? That the laundry was haunted? That a woman who didn't belong there folded our clothes for us? I tried to laugh it off, but even now, 2 years later, when I wear that shirt to paint the garage, the salt never quite washes out. On hot afternoons, when I close my eyes, I swear I can hear it again, that deep thump below the waterline. Eh? First I thought it was drums, but no. Not drums. Mechanical hearts. Something alive. Something old, beating slow and patient beneath the hull. And sometimes, if I stand too long in that shirt, I feel the fabric shift across my chest, stretching, pressing outward like it's waiting for a face to emerge. We sat all the way up in the balcony of the ship's main theater, pressed into the narrow seats that always feel slightly too small, the kind designed to keep passengers circulating back to the bar after a show rather than lingering in comfort. From that height, you could see everything the stage crew probably didn't want you to notice. The ropes, the cables, the catwalk grid, even the ghost light burning a little too bright during intermission. It was August 11th, 2023, and the ship had been rocking gently all evening as we cut through the Gulf. My wife, Dana, leaned close and whispered that she could smell seawater even in here, faint and briny, as though the ocean itself had crept into the carpet fibers. The magician came out after the usual canned fanfare. You know the type. Sleek black suit, too much hair gel, a smile practiced like a weapon. His patter was forgettable, jokes about seasickness and missing socks from the laundry. He did the rings, the silk scarves, a dove from his sleeve. The audience clapped politely, some kids near the front gasping on cue. It was ordinary enough that I found myself drifting, watching the ghost light instead of the tricks. Something about its placement bothered me. It wasn't standing mid-stage the way they usually leave it, but behind the half-closed curtain in a space that no audience should see. It threw light against the velvet folds, revealing a second stage that seemed to exist only in shadow. The finale was set up as a vanish. A woman in a red dress stepped out from the wings, tall, striking, her hair pinned in an old-fashioned style that reminded me of grainy photos from the 1930s. She didn't smile at the audience the way an assistant usually does. She just walked straight into the cabinet, which was painted garishly to resemble a lifeboat. The magician pulled the curtain shut, cracked a joke I can't remember, and then with a puff of smoke and a bang, the cabinet door swung open. Empty. Applause. But I couldn't stop looking at the ghost light. Through a narrow seam in the curtain I saw her, the woman in the red dress, standing very still. Her hands were flat against something invisible, like glass, her mouth moving soundlessly. She wasn't screaming, but she looked as if she were pleading, trying desperately to make herself understood. The way the light hit her face made her look as though she were underwater. Then the curtain dropped the rest of the way, and she vanished. The cruise director came striding out, all teeth and charm, thanking us for being such a wonderful audience and asking for one more round of applause for the magician. People clapped. Some stood. Dana tugged at my arm, ready to go. But I stayed, seated until the house lights fully came up. I half expected the woman to walk back out for a bow, but she didn't. We went back to our stateroom in silence. Dana broke it first. "That trick was weird," she said, almost reluctantly, as if naming it might invite something closer. I asked if she had seen the woman after the vanish, and she shook her head. She'd been distracted by the smoke. I wanted to press, but something in her expression told me to leave it alone. The next day, I checked the daily itinerary left on our bed by housekeeping. That evening's entertainment slot, the same time as the magician the night before, was listed. Differently, no mention of a magic show. Instead it read, "Guest lecturer, Wonders of the Deep." When I asked Dana if she thought that was strange, she shrugged. Maybe he only does the one night. That night at the bar, I spotted a stagehand I'd seen moving lights earlier. He was hunched over a beer, off duty. I asked casually about the magician if the show was a one-time deal. He gave me a long look, then made an X on his napkin with his finger. "We don't have that act this sailing," he said flatly. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile. He picked up his beer and moved to another stool, leaving the X behind like a warning. When we disembarked 3 days later, Dana left a cheerful review on a cruise forum. She mentioned the magic show in passing, describing the vanish as unforgettable. Later that evening, she received a private message from a user with no profile picture and no posts. It said, "Please don't talk about her. The trick is only safe if nobody knows it happened." The timestamp was what made my stomach knot. The message had been sent while we were still at sea, during the show itself. At the exact minute, the ghost light had burned too brightly behind that curtain. Dana deleted the review. She won't talk about it anymore. But I keep thinking about the way the woman's mouth moved, about how she seemed to be pressing against an invisible barrier, as though trying to step back into the world but trapped behind the illusion. And I think about the ship, a floating city with endless corridors, storerooms, and sealed compartments nobody ever sees. I think about how easily someone could be hidden away, kept in the shadows, shown briefly to a crowd before being pulled back, into whatever place waits behind the curtain. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the ghost light burning somewhere out there on the open sea, illuminating a stage that doesn't belong to us, where she is still waiting with her hands pressed flat against nothing. And I wonder if by watching her, by noticing what I wasn't supposed to notice, I've made myself part of the act. The first thing I noticed about the shower in our cabin was that it whined. Not just the normal groan of a cheap hotel faucet, but this high, reedy note that made the whole metal pipe sound like a flute when you turned the water on. My wife laughed. Ed, the first night, said it was like having a bird trapped in the wall. We were on the 4th deck of a cruise liner out of Galveston, bound for Cozumel, late September of last year. The weather had been muggy at the port, but clear. And by the time we sailed, it was warm enough that most people gathered on the upper deck with drinks in hand, watching the coastline shrink. Our cabin was small, 2 twin beds pushed together, a single desk, a wardrobe, and a bathroom barely large enough to stand in without bumping an elbow on something. We had splurged on a window, but I hadn't realized until the first night that the glass was thick, almost tinted, and it made the sea look gray no matter the hour. The first couple of nights were unremarkable. We ate too much, drank too much, wandered the casino, and came back to the cabin late, falling asleep with the low thrum of the ship vibrating up through the floor. On the 3rd night, the shower moaned, again, but this time it had a rhythm to it. 3 sharp knocks in the pipes, evenly spaced, like someone rapping with their knuckles. It startled me because it reminded me exactly of the way my father used to knock on my bedroom door when I was a teenager. 3 knocks when he didn't want to talk, when he just wanted me to come out for dinner or shut off the music. I stood there for a second with the knob half turned, the spray hitting my shoulder, trying to convince myself it was just air bubbles or the vibration of the ship. Then, for a heartbeat, the water ran brown. It cleared in a blink as if nothing had happened, but the taste lingered when a drop touched my lip. Mineral, metallic, like licking a coin. I told myself it was rust. Still, when the mirror fogged, I caught movement in it. Just the geometry of someone stepping into the room behind me. I startled so hard that I nearly slipped. My first instinct was to apologize. "Sorry," I said aloud, and pulled the curtain back, half expecting my wife had come in. But no one was there. Only the shower curtain breathing, sucked inward and outward by the tiny ceiling vent. I tried to shake it off, finished washing, and when I stepped out, I swiped my hand across the mirror. My stomach dropped. The fog had collected in streaky lines like someone had pressed wet fingers against it, and the words spelled themselves in uneven capitals. "Don't open in rough seas." And below that, smaller, crammed in crooked, "Not a joke." Stood frozen with the towel half wrapped around me, heart pounding like I'd been caught doing something wrong. The words dripped slowly into nothing, the fog smoothing back over the glass. By the time my wife knocked on the door asking if I was done, it looked almost clean again. I didn't tell her. I don't know why. Something about the way the message was written. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt urgent. The next morning, I tried an experiment. When she went to breakfast without me, I turned the knob just halfway and put my ear to the wall. Behind the hiss of water, I swear I heard something deeper, like a bass note, as if the pipes weren't just drawing from a tank, but directly from the ocean itself. I crouched and opened the cabinet under the sink. The joints were rimmed with a thin crust of salt, not rust. Crystals, like barnacles blooming in the dark. By the 4th night, we hit chop. Nothing extreme, just a rocking that made plates in the dining hall rattle. In the bathroom, the curtain pulsed faster, like someone breathing too hard into a paper bag. I turned the knob to off, but the water wouldn't stop. A steady dribble continued, carrying with it a smell I couldn't stand, like the inside of a fish, wet and living and wrong. The mirror fogged itself without steam. Words bloomed again, jagged this time. "We can hear you when you sing." I don't sing, not really, but I hum in the shower sometimes without thinking, and I had been humming the night before. When I came back to bed, my wife rolled over, half asleep, and asked if I'd left the faucet on. I told her no. My throat was tight. I lay awake long after she drifted back to sleep, listening to the thin metallic knock in the pipes counting out in threes, steady as a heartbeat. The next day, I noticed other cabins had their doors propped open. A couple down the hall complained loudly at the front desk about brown water. Another man I overheard at the bar muttered that his bathroom smelled like a tide pool. Nobody laughed. The staff kept brushing it off as routine maintenance. But when I walked the corridor that night, I saw salt crusting along the lower corners of some doors, faint white bloom spreading like mold. The last night before we docked back in Texas, the sea was rougher than it had been all trip. My wife took a pill to sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the whole ship rock, listening to the bathroom. The shower curtain rustled on its own, even with the vent off. I crept in, the floor cold under my feet, and watched as water began to pulse from the faucet, without anyone touching the knob. The mirror fogged every inch of it until I could barely see my reflection. Words scratched into the condensation as if invisible hands pressed hard from the other side. "Open the pipe." Something knocked once, twice, 3 times. That's when I heard the sound I can't explain. Not water, not air. It was voices, layered, hundreds maybe, all singing at once through the drain. Low and distant, but climbing toward the surface. I ran the sink just to drown it out, but the voices swelled louder, the glass trembling in its frame. The curtain pushed outward as if someone was standing inside it. I stumbled back, slammed the bathroom door and sat with my back against it until the first light of morning came through our gray window. We disembarked, and I didn't look back at the ship. My wife doesn't know any of it. She thinks I'm quiet because of post-vacation blues, but every shower since then, no matter where I am, hotel, gym, our own apartment, sometimes the pressure drops and the pipes knock 3 times. The water tastes faintly of salt, and when I catch myself humming, I stop, because if I don't, the drain hums back. The first few days on the ship felt like any other vacation. My wife and I had boarded in Miami on a humid Sunday afternoon, and by the time the horn blew and the skyline dipped behind the horizon, the whole thing already felt unreal, like we were leaving normal life behind. The days fell into rhythm: buffet breakfasts, half-hearted trivia games in the lounges, watching sunsets from the deck chairs while sipping drinks with little umbrellas in them. By the third night, I was used to the subtle sway of the ocean beneath my feet. I even liked it. The announcements became part of the background, too. The captain's cheerful reminders about ports of call, the cruise director's sing-song voice, reminding us of bingo, dance lessons, or the karaoke contest. Once the PA system glitched and repeated itself in a warped echo, and a man near me muttered, "Creepy," under his breath. We laughed it off. By then, you stopped really noticing. Until the 4th morning, it was about 5:20 a.m. The ship was still wrapped in that eerie quiet you only get at sea before dawn. I was awake because I'd never adjusted to the blackout curtains in the cabin, and my body insisted on waking early. My wife, Emily, was asleep beside me, the slow rise and fall of her breath blending with the dull hum of the ship. That was when the PA system clicked on. It wasn't the cruise director's chipper voice. It wasn't the captain. It was a man, maybe, but his tone was low and steady, like someone carefully dictating. He started reading names, about 20 of them, slowly, clearly. No explanations, no "please report to" or "congratulations to," just names. Then silence. I sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling speaker as if I could see through it. Emily stirred but didn't wake. After a few moments, I told myself it had to be a mistake, a test, a miskeyed roster. Maybe it was a crew thing. Still, something about the cadence unsettled me. It was too deliberate. At breakfast, I mentioned it to a couple at our table. The man chuckled. "Maybe you dreamed it." The woman added, "They don't make announcements before 7, against policy." When I asked guest services, the woman behind the desk tilted her head slightly like a bird listening to a distant sound and gave me a practiced smile. "No announcements were made before 7, sir." She asked for my cabin number, wrote it down with perfect politeness, then immediately slipped the paper under the desk. I swear she never actually wrote anything at all. The next morning, it happened again. This time, I was wide awake when the PA crackled on. The same voice. The same calm pacing. Another list of names, some new, but a couple I recognized from the day before, then my own. I froze. The syllables of my name hung in the cabin like smoke. Emily didn't stir. I lay there, heart hammering, waiting for it to repeat, waiting for something to explain it away. But the voice moved on, finished the list, and the line went dead. At breakfast, I searched every crew member's name tag. Not a single one matched the list I had memorized in my head. I even checked the small memorial wall near the chapel, where plaques were dedicated to passengers who had passed away on previous cruises. Nothing. I almost wanted to see the names there, wanted the world to give me a reason to stop feeling the way I was starting to feel. That night, my sleep twisted into something else. I dreamed of the muster drill, standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers in bulky orange vests. A woman with a clipboard checked names, frowning as she reached mine. She looked up at me, confused, then shook her head. "He's already counted," she said. The words jolted me awake. My hands were clenched around nothing, and there was a sharp taste of salt on my tongue, as though I had been trying to drink the air. By the 6th morning, I was terrified of sleeping at all. I lay awake, staring at the red digits of the cabin clock, waiting. Sure enough, just after 5, the PA clicked. The voice began again. Names, names, names. This time I pressed my hand to Emily's shoulder, whispering her awake, but she only shifted and sighed. She didn't hear it, or maybe she couldn't. My name came again, followed by silence. That day, I stayed on deck as long as I could, staring at the horizon, the endless stretch of gray-green ocean. The ship's motion was steady, but beneath it all I thought I felt another rhythm, like the slow heartbeat of something vast moving under the waves. At night, when I closed my eyes, I swore I could feel the ship counting me. Disembarkation day arrived with sudden brightness, the PA filled with cheerful goodbyes and reminders about luggage tags. No strange names, no low, steady voice. As we walked down the gangway, the air smelled of sunscreen, rubber mats, and hot pavement. I almost convinced myself I had imagined it all. In the terminal, we queued for customs. The officer took my passport, flipped it open, and typed something into his computer. His brow furrowed. He looked at me, then at the screen again. Another officer came over, leaned in, and frowned the same way. I asked if something was wrong. The second officer said, "Happens all the time." His tone was casual, but his eyes didn't leave the monitor. The first one stamped my papers, except the sound wasn't right. It was soft, like the ink pad was dry, or like the stamp hadn't touched paper at all. He slid my passport back without meeting my gaze. I wanted to ask what was on the screen. I wanted to demand to know if my name was already listed somewhere it shouldn't be. But I didn't. Now I'm back home, in my own bed, in a house that should feel safe. But sometimes in that fragile hour before dawn, I swear I hear the faint crackle of a speaker coming to life, followed by the patient voice of a man reading names and waiting for mine. My favorite time was always 3 a.m, when the running track on the upper deck of the ship was quiet, claimed only by the wind and the occasional drunk stumbling home from the nightclub. I liked the emptiness of it, the stretch of horizon unbroken by land or light, the way the air tasted cleaner that far out at sea. That night was no different. The water was calm, the stars visible despite the faint glow of the ship's lights, and the hum of the engines vibrated through the soles of my shoes. I leaned against the railing, my palms pressed to the paint, roughened by salt and damp with condensation, and I looked down at the ship's wake. That's when I saw it. There were 2 of them. The first was ours. A wide, foaming white ribbon stretching. Out behind us, the honest mark of steel carving water. But alongside it, no more than 20 feet away, ran another. Fainter, thinner, but steady. It kept pace as though an invisible twin ship traveled just out of sight. I squinted into the darkness, scanning for any vessel, any hint of light or silhouette. But the ocean was empty, still. The wake moved as ours did, adjusting when we turned slightly, matching us as if tethered. I followed it as I walked forward along the track, past the dark swimming pool with its surface shivering in the breeze, past the outdoor movie screen, showing nothing but the ghostly reflection of the ship's own lights. At the bow, I stopped and leaned far over the rail. The second wake curved inward like a shy animal circling close, then touched the hull. The steel beneath me trembled, not from any impact, but in a way that felt alive, like recognition. In that moment, I swear I heard something. A sound deep and vast, like a breath being drawn in by lungs far too large to exist. The hairs on the back of my neck lifted, and I stayed there, staring, until the faintest pink of dawn started touching the sky. Slowly, as the light spread, the second wake faded until there was only ours again, honest and alone. Nobody else seemed to notice. Or maybe they pretended not to. At breakfast, I mentioned it to one of the bartenders who'd been cleaning glasses, nearby the night before. He paused, looked at me too long, then clucked his tongue as if dismissing a silly story. "We don't talk about the sister," he muttered under his breath, then blinked and pretended he'd said nothing at all. When I asked what he meant, he only shook his head and poured another drink for someone else. The rest of the voyage passed without incident, but I couldn't stop myself from looking out over the rails every night. Sometimes I thought I saw it. Again, a paler trail in the black water. But whenever I blinked, it would vanish, leaving me unsure if it had ever been there. When the cruise ended, I convinced myself I had been overtired, maybe even drunk on too many cocktails, my imagination conjuring things in the dark sea. 2 months later, though, a friend sent me a link to an old newspaper clipping she had stumbled across. She knew I had just been on that ship and thought it was interesting. The article described a collision decades ago, off a coast we had never visited. The grainy photo showed a ship with lines almost identical to ours, but with a different name painted along the hull. It was half-turned in the water, smoke rising, faintly, and people in life jackets stood pressed along the rails like the teeth of a comb. The caption mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Witnesses at the time reported a companion vessel traveling alongside the doomed ship just before the accident. But that vessel was never positively identified. No official record of it was ever found. Some said it was a trick of the waves. Others insisted it was real, though it vanished as soon as the collision happened. I know what I saw that night. I know the steel shivered beneath my hands, and I know I heard that deep, impossible breath. Since then, I can't shake it. Walking city streets, I'll hear the long, low call of a ship's horn even though I'm miles from water. Sometimes the sidewalk seems to tilt under my feet, just slightly, as though I'm back at sea. And in those moments I smell things that don't belong, paint and salt, sunscreen and diesel. When I close my eyes, I see 2 wakes again, side by side. The second one doesn't just follow anymore. It turns under, sliding beneath, circling, like a seal that has spotted prey. There's something clever about it, playful even, but I can't escape the feeling that it's hungry too. And every time I hear that horn echo across the traffic, I wonder how much longer until the sister finds me again.